A Roman soldier did not fear death in the way modern audiences might expect. He feared falling, because in the chaos of close combat, the moment his feet left the ground, his fate could be sealed not by a blade, but by the weight of hundreds of men who would never even see him. In the Roman army, survival depended on staying upright within the formation, shield locked, body aligned, moving as part of a disciplined wall. But when that formation fractured under pressure, the battlefield transformed into a dense, shifting mass where the fallen were no longer visible, only felt beneath the movement of others. A soldier who stumbled or was pushed down did not land in open space. He vanished into a crush of bodies, armor, and shields, his own equipment turning against him. His shield trapped his arms. His helmet restricted air, while boots and bodies pressed down from above. In this condition, death was rarely immediate. The soldier remained conscious, fully aware of his situation, unable to move, unable to rise, and most critically, unable to breathe. The weight on his chest increased with every passing moment, ribs compressing, lungs struggling to expand, each breath becoming shorter and more desperate, while the sounds of battle continued above him, muffled and distant, as if the world had closed in. There was no enemy to fight, no wound to resist, only the slow and unavoidable failure of the body under pressure and suffocation. Roman warfare, built on tight formations and relentless forward movement, made it nearly impossible for others to stop and assist. Breaking rank could expose the entire line to danger, and so the fallen were left behind, their fate determined by the momentum of the battle rather than the actions of an individual opponent. This kind of death occurred most often in large engagements where space was limited and formations collapsed into each other, turning organized combat into a crushing crowd, where the distinction between ally and enemy blurred into a single mass of bodies. The experience unfolded in stages, beginning with the shock of falling, followed by the immediate loss of space, the impact of weight pressing down from multiple directions, and the growing panic as air became scarce. Even a trained soldier, conditioned to endure pain and fear, could do little in such a situation. Instinct drove him to push upward, to find space, to breathe, but the pressure only increased and movement became impossible. Unlike wounds from weapons, which could bring rapid unconsciousness, this end forced the soldier to remain present, to feel each moment as his strength diminished and his body struggled against an environment that allowed no escape. In the Roman military system, where discipline and cohesion defined both identity and survival, this death represented the complete loss of control, reducing a trained fighter to a trapped individual within an unstoppable force. It was not marked by visible heroism or dramatic action, but by the silent reality beneath the surface of battle, where men disappeared without ceremony, consumed by the very formation that was meant to protect them. For those who survived such encounters, the memory was not only of combat, but of the constant awareness that a single misstep could lead to a slow and suffocating end. This form of death, though often overlooked, stands as one of the most painful a Roman soldier could endure, defined not by a single violent moment, but by the prolonged experience of being crushed, immobilized, and gradually deprived of breath within the relentless pressure of ancient warfare. In the aftermath of such engagements, the evidence of this kind of death was often only revealed when the movement stopped and the formations separated, leaving behind layers of bodies pressed into the ground, some still locked in the positions they had fallen into, shields wedged, limbs trapped, armor bent inward by force rather than by weapons. Those tasked with clearing the field would find men who bore few visible wounds, yet whose deaths had come through compression and suffocation, a reminder that not all casualties were the result of direct combat. The structure of Roman equipment, designed for protection in upright combat, contributed to the severity of such deaths once a soldier was pinned. The rigid helmet limited airflow and visibility, while the heavy shield, meant to deflect blows, became an additional weight that restricted movement and breathing. Even the discipline that defined the Roman army played a role, as soldiers were trained to maintain formation above all else, reinforcing the forward momentum that made it impossible to halt and recover those who had fallen. In particularly dense fighting, especially where terrain constrained movement, such as narrow passes, fortified approaches, or the edges of fortifications, the pressure intensified, increasing the likelihood that once a man went down, he would not rise again. This was not a death driven by panic or disorder alone, but one that could occur within otherwise controlled and disciplined engagements, simply as a consequence of proximity and pressure. The psychological effect on soldiers was significant. The fear of falling was constant, shaping how they moved, how tightly they held formation, and how they responded to the push of opposing forces. Maintaining footing became as critical as wielding a weapon, and the line between survival and death could be as narrow as a single misstep or a moment of imbalance. In this way, the Roman battlefield was not only a place of direct violence, but also an environment where the physical presence of the army itself became a force capable of causing harm independent of weapons. The crushing death of a fallen soldier illustrates the reality that warfare in the ancient world was not always defined by individual combat, but by collective movement, where the mass of men could overwhelm as effectively as any blade. It is within this context that the most painful deaths must be understood, not as isolated acts, but as outcomes shaped by the structure, discipline, and density of the armies involved. The Roman soldier, trained to trust in formation and cohesion, relied on the very system that could, under certain conditions, become inescapable, turning protection into confinement and strength into pressure. And so, while the image of battle often focuses on strikes and wounds, the reality includes these quieter, more prolonged ends, where a man's final moments were defined not by a visible enemy, but by the unyielding weight of the world around him, pressing down until resistance was no longer possible and breath could no longer be drawn. Even within the brutal standards of the ancient world, Roman commanders understood that once a formation lost cohesion, the danger extended far beyond enemy weapons. Discipline existed not only to organize attack, but to prevent the battlefield itself from becoming deadly to the army fighting upon it. A Roman legion depended on order, spacing, and collective control. When those elements failed under pressure, soldiers could become trapped within the momentum of their own side, caught in a force too large and too dense for any individual to resist. This reality shaped the mentality of Roman soldiers long before battle began. Training emphasized endurance, stability, and formation discipline because survival depended as much on maintaining position as it did on courage. A soldier learned how to march, how to lock shields, how to advance in unison, and how to hold ground under pressure. Every movement inside the line had consequences for the men beside him. A single stumble could disrupt spacing. A collapse in one section could ripple outward through the formation, creating confusion, openings, and panic. For this reason, fear on the Roman battlefield was often less about the enemy standing ahead and more about the possibility of disorder emerging within the line itself. In tightly compressed combat, men could barely maneuver their weapons freely. Visibility disappeared behind shields, dust, and bodies. Sound became distorted beneath the roar of movement and impact. Soldiers relied heavily on instinct, discipline, and the physical presence of those around them to maintain cohesion. Once that cohesion broke, the battlefield became unpredictable and unforgiving. Ancient warfare was fought at close range, where exhaustion accumulated quickly. Armor grew heavier with sweat and dirt. Legs weakened under constant strain. Breathing became more difficult as formations compressed tighter during prolonged engagements. Under such conditions, maintaining balance was a constant physical challenge. Uneven terrain, mud, loose stones, discarded equipment, or fallen bodies could all become hazards capable of bringing a man down at the worst possible moment. What makes this form of death especially horrifying is not only the pain itself, but the isolation within it. A Roman soldier trapped beneath the crush of battle could be surrounded by comrades and still remain completely beyond help. The formation could not stop. The pressure of combat allowed no pause for rescue. Above him, the battle continued forward, indifferent to the fate of the individual beneath it. And in many cases, those still fighting may never have realized what had happened below their feet. The image often associated with Roman warfare is one of discipline, strength, and military precision. Yet beneath that image existed another reality, quieter and far more brutal. Not every soldier died from a sword strike or spear wound. Some disappeared beneath the weight of war itself, consumed not by a single enemy, but by the collective force of hundreds of men struggling to survive. It is this combination of helplessness, suffocation, confinement, and prolonged awareness that made such deaths among the most feared experiences on the ancient battlefield. The soldier remained conscious as space vanished around him, as air diminished, and as the pressure of armor, shields, and bodies transformed protection into entrapment. There was no decisive final blow, no clear moment where combat ended and death began, only the gradual failure of the body beneath unstoppable weight. In the end, the most painful way a Roman soldier could die was not always the most visible. It did not require dramatic wounds or heroic final stands. Sometimes it came silently, beneath the chaos of battle, hidden from sight while the army continued moving overhead. And for the Roman soldier standing within the formation, that possibility never truly disappeared. Every advance carried it. Every collision of shields carried it. Every step across the battlefield carried the understanding that survival depended on remaining upright within the living machine of war. Because once a Roman soldier fell, the battle rarely stopped for him.